This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you.
Okay. Can
Thank
you
you.
hear me now?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Can you
you.
hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Rosalyn. Let me just introduce
Okay.
that this is the Differently Abled Network meeting, and this is June 30th, 2024, and we're just so happy to have everybody here. And we'd like you to learn more about the Differently Abled Network meeting by going to our website at www.whiteappleinstitute.org. That's right, and you'll see it, as a matter of fact, in the write-up underneath this video. So we welcome you, Rosalyn. Thank you so much for coming in today and talking about cooling centers. Cooling centers, this is one of our community business partners. How are you today?
I am doing great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Tell us about cooling centers.
I'm going to tell you about cooling centers, but before I tell you about cooling centers, I'm going to tell you how I got into cooling centers. I went to something called the Heat Leadership Academy, put on by Phoenix Revitalization Corporation and the Nature's Conservancy back in 2022. And so from there, it was about 5-month course. It was free. It was back during COVID. And so it was over Zoom meetings and internet. And what happened is we learned a lot about heat mitigation. We learned about heat in the disproportionate things for heat in Arizona and Central Phoenix. We learned about heat islands. We learned about the need for, because Arizona is so hot, over the last 20 years, we've had people that have passed away being out in the heat because of lack of heat resources. And we tied it into the homelessness that people are experiencing. So a cooling center is where someone can go and get cooled off. The difference between a cooling center and a heat respite center, a heat respite could be a library where someone can go and stay for an hour or 2 or 3 and get cooled off and get water. A cooling center provides longer hours. And it can be up to 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours. The individuals have an opportunity to go in and get some water, to get something to eat, and to get to find out what other resources are available to them in the community. They learn. Go ahead.
May I ask you may I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay. And that question, I think, is in everyone's mind today. Is that when we talk about our topic, which is how do we define the underserved? How do you define the underserved? How do other people here today define the underserved? And many of us are underserved, including myself. And I write about that in my upcoming book. Rosalyn, the people that use cooling centers, are they mostly underserved in the sense of poverty guidelines?
Okay. A cooling center serves anyone who needs to get out of the heat, who needs to get a cold drink of water. We've had families who just wanted to save on their cooling bill in the summertime who came in and used the cooling centers. We have people whose air conditionings have broken down, so they need somewhere to go while they find a resource to get that fixed. We also have people who are working out in the heat to just stop by and get water.
Yes.
Then we also have individuals who come in to the cooling centers and they use them to get out of the heat for the better part of the day. They have nowhere else to go. And so a cooling center is one of the places that they can go get out of the heat, get some water, get some food.
Now that's the key. That's the key right there. That's the key right there is that when we're talking about people who are usually that usually are defined by that poverty guideline, that they are labeled as underserved under that umbrella because there is no other. You just said it a moment ago, no other avenue for them to go. I think you have we have a question here. Is that a question, Lori?
Well, I'm just going to say Doug needs to mute because it's messing with the sound. So if Doug can mute himself, that would be great. Everybody needs to be muted except the people that are talking.
All right. Let's see if we can. Morgan, are you able? Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Rosalyn, sorry for that. Okay.
No problem.
So do you see where I'm going with this is that to define the underserved as under the umbrella that we're trying to, so that we can help people to understand more about how hard it is for somebody who's underserved to find somewhere to go. And then from my understanding, as I just spoke with someone just the other day and I asked, do you know where a cooling center is? He said he knew where one was, but he couldn't even get to it. Okay. So are you dealing with a lot of cases like that?
Okay, hold on 1 second. I'm going to grab some information. It's going to take me 2 minutes and I will be right back. So
okay, well, our time is moving on, my dear, because we only had like 9 minutes for this slot.
Okay.
So
okay, I'm gonna say this really fast.
Okay.
I just pulled up the number of cooling centers, heat respite, and places. There are 168 of them right now in the Valley, Tempe, Chandler, Gilbert, Buckeye, Glendale, Surprise, and everything like that.
Okay.
They also, you have Elaine that gives them transportation. You have 211 that can give them transportation. Right now, they're overwhelmed with the number of people. And so when they call that resource, they are going to take them to the cooling center that is closest to them. And
right.
and
Right.
sometimes,
Exactly.
that may be a cooling center that is only open from 12 to 6.
Right.
Or
Right.
12 to 4. So they're ending up going.
So there are limitations. Are you saying there's limitations to the cooling centers? Now, can they go if they can go from 12 to 4 any day though? That's
Yes.
It's not a limitation on the number of times they can use it, but the most important thing that I wanted to come out of what you're trying to do with the cooling centers and helping and putting us in there as a support system is that there are many people who are underserved out there, and you're seeing them every day. I know that you're seeing them and you're hearing from them every
Yes.
day, and I'm just wondering how do you define someone who's underserved in your own opinion and in the work that you're doing out there?
Okay, I'm going to say there's only one 24-hour cooling center, and that is where it's underserved. It is anyone that is homeless or facing homelessness, anyone that that is working, but yet they cannot afford the rent. So they may go to a cooling center to sleep during the day.
Right.
They find the cooling centers where they can go and they can sleep during the day so that they can work their night shift.
Right. That's the kind of stuff that people need to hear, because you see, a lot of times people don't understand that underserved people are working people too. That you may be sitting next to someone in a classroom or in your employment situation who is actually underserved. And that's what I was trying to get to. I'm so glad you brought that up, because homelessness is a very, very big issue. And we want to try to move on. We had a young lady who was coming on today to talk about her situation. She has a 14-year-old daughter, and she's trying her best to live day to day in a shelter. And most importantly, the days that she's not able to get into a shelter because it closes down, there's a long line of people that are trying to get in. I don't know if any of you have experienced that. Feel free to talk about that. We have another special guest. I'll have to acknowledge her, Joan Cisco, today. I know she's shaking her head, if possible, about the situation of homelessness among women veterans, especially too. And it's just incredible to me. But here's what I wanted to bring out, and it's just breaking my heart. And I just got this in from Washington D.C. and so let me hear it. Here it is. It's a Supreme Court ruling. You're not going to believe this, okay? Rosalyn and my other guest here, my friends here. It says, in a profoundly disappointing ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court today decided that it is I want to say unconstitutional, but constitutional. Did you hear me? That it is constitutional to arrest or fine homeless individuals for using survival items like blankets or pillows in public places when no alternative shelter is available. And they even included when no alternative shelter is available. So what on earth would a person do but to lay on their hands? Is that going to be the alternative, that they cannot put a pillow out underneath them or a blanket? And when we talk about the Supreme Court making a decision like this, it means that the situation has truly got out of hand. I'm open for your comments. Do you have any comments to make, any of you in the audience? Because I like to keep this as interactive as possible. Any comments that you have?
Okay, I'm going to make a comment really quick.
Sure.
And one of the things is that the faith-based organizations and some individuals, nonprofits, those are the people who are providing the tents, the blankets, the pillows,
Yes.
and the things that the things that were just outlawed. And so if you're going to outlaw something and say that is not an alternative for someone, then what we are going to be asking for in that alternative is, tell us how much more affordable housing, permanent housing, temporary housing that you are offering, and make temporary housing not connected to sometimes a mental illness, not connected to alcoholism, not connected to drug use, because we have individuals who do not qualify for housing under those guidelines. And with that, I'm going to step off.
Wow. Wow. That's powerful what you just said just now, because the point is that they're offering, and this is what I heard you say, they're offering no alternative, you know. I'm looking for, I can't seem to see whether or not Dr. Jane Garcia has arrived yet. Okay. And Lori, did you have any comment on the lack of blankets or of pillows? Can you believe that?
It's inhumane. I just don't even know how they could even consider that. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not shocked, because of so much that's gone on lately, but just the basic things you need to survive. I can't believe they would say that. Just pisses me off, excuse my language, but unbelievable.
It's a good point. Good point. Good point. And when this came into me, and being that we had Brittany coming on today, who was going to talk a little bit about the horror that she lives in shelters, is just was just unreal to me. And so I do want to acknowledge Joan. Did you want to? Joan, I definitely wanted to acknowledge you and our veteran speaker, and we're coming up on that now. And our Doug Reynolds is here. Doug Reynolds is here as our Air Force veteran here. And he came into my office this morning. Okay, yeah. So Doug, I'm gonna have you just speak right in here. That way you don't have to put on your microphone. And go ahead.
I've seen a lot of work done by this organization, and I'm impressed at the number of people who have helped out over the years. And I really commend Dr. Applewhite wife for the fine work she's doing. And I enjoying listening to you people because you're important to the White Apple Network.
Thank you so much. And without further ado, I'm going to talk about women veterans today. And Dr. Jane Garcia is not here yet. I'm sure she's coming on. Okay, do I have a full gallery here? Okay, I do understand. Okay, thank you. All right. I wanted to talk about the situation that's going on right now with women veterans. And one of the U.S. news reports that came through from the Department of Housing and Urban Development talks about, oh, there's Dr. Jane Garcia. I'm glad you're coming on just in time where I'm just reading this fantastic article that came through from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Unbelievable that housing as a whole went down for a period of time. And there was affordable housing, and then all of a sudden it took a tremendous slump and people have not been able to find it. But this really bothered me. It says homelessness among women veterans actually increased by nearly 24%. By nearly 24% from 3,100 to 3,900, according to data from the Housing and Urban Development. Unbelievable. What is going on that's causing such an increase in women veterans becoming homeless? And Dr. Jane Garcia, we have spoken about this many times, and I've also shared in this conversation with Mr. Doug Reynolds, who just spoke just now very highly of the organization. Thank you very much, Mr. Reynolds. Really appreciate what you said. And you know, he's concerned about the state of women veterans and veterans as a whole. He served as an Air Force veteran, is that correct? Right. Okay, all right. So and we have someone else, Joan Cisco from Veterans First, is also listening in to, this afternoon, and I'm just so happy to have you here. But I mean, and just looking at that statistic, it must be mind blowing to you also, if you don't already know it. And by the way, you look absolutely stunning this morning. Good morning.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really good to be in on the conversation. One of the things that I want to really highlight is people like Joan, who have been doing the work, and you, Dr. Apple, focusing on women veterans for a very long time. And I feel like sometimes we don't, when a person go through some challenges, because I've used Joan program. I've been in Arizona 12 years, and I had difficulty paying my bill, and I applied through Joan, and so I have benefited from these programs that are available.
No, wait a minute. Did you just say you have been underserved also? That you have shared underneath that umbrella of underserved where you had to go for services?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, me too. Isn't that interesting? But people don't see us like that. Yeah. You see, we're dressed up, right, and we're fixed up, and we're cleaned up.
Right.
And we're going to work every day, and still we need services, don't we?
Yeah. And so the journey, what people don't realize, and this was some time ago, I think this was maybe 7-8 years ago, but this was some time ago. The journey as an individual is making that transition. It takes a solid 10 to 14 years for a person to be, quote unquote, fully reintegrated and fully make that transition, because there are various dimensions to our development that is sometimes stunted as we are a service member. We grow in other ways in leaps and bounds, but in other ways we don't. And when we leave the military, one of the things that we leave behind is the social support group and the camaraderie that we had, and the services that are the safety nets that are present. So one is the camaraderie, two is the safety net. And as we leave those things behind and become civilians, we have to create those things again. And it's a journey to create a safety net for yourself, because now you're in a different environment with a different culture, right? And even if people go home, one of the motivation for joining military service is opportunities, and 58%, and I need to send you this, Dr. Apple, 58% of women veterans, they join for new experiences, career opportunities, and so forth. No, 33% join for career opportunities. There's also a segment of the population who joined the military because they're trying to escape the home environment that they're in. But then when they exit military service, they return back to that unsupported environment that they left. Does that make sense?
I can't even imagine what you're saying right now, because it's just so true. But I wanted to clarify for those who are not familiar with the military term of transition that she's speaking about, from active duty to being a veteran, becoming a veteran, which is a whole different psychology. And so she's talking about how that change takes place. And every time that you speak, and we have this conversation about those things, about the lack of camaraderie and the lack of support systems and the lack of a safety net, it reinforces for me why you even are part of the Differently Abled Network. And I want everyone to acknowledge that she is now an official board member of the board of directors for White Apple Institute also, in addition to being a community business partner, because she is developing her own agencies and different projects that she's on. But as a woman veteran yourself, and someone who has had to knock on the door for services, at a time where you understood that it takes patience to ask for services, and that's many times something that women veterans, I've noticed that it's very hard for us to develop on the outside world, because the outside world is not military, where you can report that something wrong and usually get it fixed. Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong with that, any of you veterans listening. Okay. But you can get it fixed faster in the military than you can in civilian life. And it's just because of the process of the system. And patience is a key. What tips could you give for having more patience in knocking on the doors for services? Because that's where we seem to lose hope and helplessness.
So I think one of the, and I wrote some of these things down, don't wait too long to ask for help. You know what I mean?
Good one.
Because
I see that a lot.
Yeah, you see it coming down the pike. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You see it coming down the pike, so don't wait too long. That's one. Two, do not be afraid or ashamed to ask for help. And I always tell people, as service members, we're humble people, but we're an arrogant set of people.
Say that again.
We're humble people, but we're an arrogant set of people. We just are.
Well, they teach us that.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. We're
very arrogant people.
Yes.
And so in that arrogance, we don't ask for help. But in the interim, we're the ones that's suffering.
Yes. Yeah, and in the long run, when we see many of us, especially women, especially as women, we don't want to ask for help right away, and we go down. That's what starts a downward spiral.
Yes.
And that's what I've noticed with a lot of women veterans is that, you know, if they had just asked for help right at the very beginning, you know, for anything, it could be just the smallest thing. I've had them just ask for gas money to get from one place to another, you know, and they feel a sense of embarrassment, okay, and a loss of pride. And I do understand it because I remember I didn't go to combat or anything, but I remember leaving basic training with a sense of I don't know about losing that word, but I have to use it, a sense of arrogance, a sense of pride, okay?
Yeah.
And standing tall, and then to go into a situation, and I think Doug has something to say, to go into a situation where now you have to say, please, can I have this? Okay. And Doug, you're experiencing some things like that now yourself, aren't you?
You're muted, Doug.
Let
He's
me unmute.
muted.
Can you unmute Doug? Okay, hold on a minute. We're gonna unmute you. Let us unmute you. Okay, you got him?
I am
Okay.
experiencing a lot of difficulty in getting things the way I would like to have them. And a lot of people
Morgan, please unmute.
like don't want to help.
Mm-hmm. You mean the agencies that you go to for help don't want to help?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Because you're right now in a situation where you need some help. Yeah. And how does that make you feel as a veteran? As a veteran, the strength.
Doesn't get me down.
Okay, it doesn't get you down. Okay, you don't let it get you down. There you go. Mm-hmm. Keep on pushing. There you go. And that's a good tip. You know, I mean, to understand that, yes, men veterans, male veterans go through many of the same things that women veterans go through, especially those that are taking care of their children. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but back to women veterans, and the reason why that becomes an issue for me is because I am one, you know, and I've experienced many of these things that even what Rosalyn was talking about a little while ago, just before you came on, Dr. Jane, she was speaking about cooling centers. And I wanted to ask her, Rosalyn, do you find yourself dealing with, I know one of the first conversations we had was about a veteran. Is that right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. And we were talking about how we wanted more veterans to be involved in the cooling centers and how difficult it was for them to come into the cooling center and even ask for help. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I worked with other veterans, and so if they found someone who was a veteran that was either homeless or experiencing homeless or getting ready, just to get them to come into the cooling centers. Cooling centers are resource centers, and that's what we're talking about,
Yes.
where they can get the information about organizations that can help. Now, the one thing that this is where I go off, is we cannot keep using the same 10 organizations because they are overwhelmed. They do not have enough resources. Their individuals have sometimes done this for so long that they are they feel
exhausted. They're exhausted.
Thank you. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're totally exhausted, and their funds are exhausted. Their staff is exhausted. Their staff doesn't know how to handle the new personality. The new person is underserved. And in that underserved population, we have women veterans. And I have a big question for you, Rosalyn. How many women veterans do you see that actually admit being to women veterans that are in cooling centers?
You know what? And I would have to go to the research. They just started doing research last year to see the populations that were being served. When I was doing it 2 years ago, all we did was ask the age of the person. Sometimes we would ask if they would want to identify their nationality. Sometimes we the age, the nationality, what kind of services they were looking for. Were they looking for help with a job? Were they looking for help for to get food stamps? Were they looking for help for employment? Were they looking for help for housing? So those were the kinds of things that were at the cooling center that I was using. We also had community nurses or community health workers that were there that provided services. That model, I'm gonna say this, wrap it up. That model became the model for a lot of other different cooling centers, but places like the Justice Center was already doing a good job.
There's some kudos here.
Yeah. A guy named Austin Davis with Arizona Hugs doing an excellent job with transportation wish lists, finding people as far out as I believe that was Casa Grande or something like that, and bringing them into the cooling center over in South Phoenix. So now I know they have more categories that they are asking for, and they do have the research going on through ASU, through the new Office of Sustainability and Resiliency that they have out there. Okay.
Well, let us hope that in their model that they are including, are you a veteran, okay, or have you served? Because that's a common expression that people will at least mark the box, have you served at least? And Rosalyn, I can tell you just from what you're saying, the feedback is that women veterans do not just raise up their hand when they walk into a cooling center and say, I'm a veteran too, okay? Where male veterans will tell you that they're a veteran pretty much right away. Don't you experience that?
Yes. Yeah, the guys would come in. They would sometimes have something that would identify them, whether there was a hat, a patch, something that identified them so we could say, thank you for serving.
Good point. Good point. Yeah, something that identifies. You see what I mean by Dr. Jane? Something to identify. And women veterans don't usually have anything that really identifies them as a veteran, and unless they wear the cap or something like that.
Yeah, Rosin, very good points that you brought up. And I'm glad that they're adding that question into the data points, because what we know for sure is that women veterans are not really represented in research, which is one of the reasons why we are underserved. And so let me quantify us as women veterans. So let's say there are 100 people. So this is the general population. 100 people for the general population. 10 out of that 100 people would be a veteran, right? Because the veteran population represents 10% of the general population.
Okay.
But out of that 10, only one would be a woman.
Okay.
And so women veterans, we actually represent 1% of the general US population. We're a very small minority, and we represent 10% of the veteran population. And so we're an extremely small minority. And because we are extremely small in the numbers, we are a lot of times not accounted for in research, in data collection, in data analysis, and sometimes when we as researchers are really aggregating the data and wanting to use this data, sometimes we would discard the women veteran information out of the data points because it's too small of a number, which, how do I explain? During the program creation, as we're creating different programs and writing different programs, the needs of the women veterans are not taken into consideration because they were not taken into consideration in the original data collection and the data analysis. And so when it's time to create programs that is suitable for them and beneficial for them, services and service organizations really have very little to go with and to go by because there's not a lot of information there. Does that make sense?
That makes so much sense, because that makes sense in the marketing and promotion of of the cooling centers and when I say marketing and promotion, I don't mean from a big standpoint like a soda company or something like that. I'm talking about just in listing resources. When they list resources, those resources don't ask whether or not they're women veterans, and so therefore we don't have the numbers. And then women veterans are not willing to say that I serve, because for a lot of different reasons, and we know that many of it goes back to the non-combat. And I just have to say, and please feel free to add into this. When we talk about the non-combat veteran, it's a real slap in the face, and I felt it myself personally, and I have heard it over and over and over again. Is the fact that, did you serve in combat? And if you didn't, then there's a restriction on services available to you. Okay. And when you talk about the non-combat umbrella, you're talking about mostly women veterans, again, being a very, very small percentage, because we just started going to combat, in this last, should I say decade? Maybe a couple of decades.
Gulf War.
Yeah, right.
I think it's really starting in Gulf War. So that's maybe 20 years now.
What do you agree with that? I mean, you see the difference in the promotion and the lack of the lack of standing up and saying, I am a woman veteran, because there's the sense of pride, okay, that that little bit of arrogance that you talked about earlier, you know what I mean, has been lost. And there's a sense now of hopelessness and helplessness that starts happening when they don't have, like Doug, he has a support system. So Doug was able to adapt and say, I'm not going to let this get me down. I'm going to keep on. What did you say? I'm going to keep on. Keep on pushing. Keep on pushing. And a lot of us don't have that. That comes from very, very deep down inside, and also having a support system, that safety net that we were talking about, to step out and say, okay, I'll do this. I'll be part of this.
It's incumbent on the veteran, because we can tell, this needs to happen, that needs to happen, but it's also very incumbent on the individual veteran for them to make the effort. I work on one of the college campuses, and it was interesting. The lady, they opened a veteran center on campus. And so I went there about a month or two ago, and the lady was like, the veterans are not coming here to use the center. And she was just going on and on and on about them just absolutely refusing to show up.
Validated, I understand.
Yeah, the chaplain was there, him and his wife, they would cook so that people can show up, and they tried this and that, and the veterans simply were not showing up. And so that's one of the piece where individually as veterans, we have to make a decision. And that's a hard one, because I think that's a learning curve for all of us. I know for me, that was a steep learning curve. It's like you have to talk to people, I don't like people. What?
Right.
You exist among people. What are you going to do? You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so the individual veteran, and I feel like that's one of the pieces when you listen to tips for the transition, asking questions. We as service members are not taught to ask questions.
Wow. Wow.
Right? But
Yeah.
that's such an essential skill that we need
Yes. Yes, it
as
is.
civilians. You better ask questions because
How
if
about this?
you,
You got to know what questions to ask, though. That's the problem that we're having now is that,
I
when we
agree.
talk about geography and they don't know the questions to ask. And we hope that through the Differently Able Network, and that's why your donations are very, very important in order for us to start doing this weekly, in order for us to expand what we're doing and our outreach is that we want to have more programs that will be on video podcasts that will teach people what questions to ask. And
Yeah, because it's so important that questions are asked, knowing what question to ask, and that was one of the things in terms of the data have been bearing out as well. Because as service member, we have our little sector. You man your sector. That's what you do. You know what I mean?
yes,
And as you man your sector and you take care of your sector, we don't sometimes get involved with the other pieces that makes this
to make
sector
the whole.
move as a unit. You know what I
Yes,
mean?
yes,
Whereas in the civilian world, we truly have to understand parts and whole
yes.
and parts. You know what I mean?
All
And
the moving parts and how
yeah,
they move around because they
yeah,
don't stay stable.
no, no. And the parts are affected by the whole, and the whole is affected by the part. You
Yes.
know what I mean?
Oh yes.
Um,
Oh yes.
so it's oh, what's my sector now, Rosalyn? You know what? That's a loaded question, but I'll answer it as succinctly as possible.
Okay.
Um, so I was in education when I left teaching. I mean, the military, I went into education, so I've taught for a while. But one of the things as I have taught and in education, why I pursue my doctorate, and I did it, and my studies and my areas of expertise is actually women veterans, is because the veteran community is a community that I can serve until I die. Because we are um people who serve, they're selfless people. And sometimes it's selfless to a fault, you see. And so what I'm doing now in terms of my sector is I am really getting into writing the reintegration programs and just really getting into the women veteran space.
Thank you.
Because then it's important for others to see us, right? And to see us professionally, to see us as women veterans, to see us as we've overcome various things, and to
Especially.
see us, yeah, and to see us, and for us to be able to mentor our younger veterans who are coming behind us, particularly the women veterans, because mentorship is a big deal.
I want
Individuals, I'm sorry.
I really want to be clear on how the women veterans and I mean I got it with the small numbers and even that even when they do the research that we come out on a very small level, and so but it's not an insignificant level. We're not insignificant just because we come out as a small number, okay? And the point is that we served, we signed a blank check just like everyone else. We signed a blank check and we're trying our best to adapt to a life that we knew before. Now we got to get this straight now. Okay. And you and I have talked about how the life before determines how we make the choices now. Because we came from an underserved environment before we signed up into the military, okay? So we were living in the projects, so we were living in Section 8 housing in an under-resourced a community, any of those things. And then we go into the service and we start building on a dream, the American dream. You know, I call it the Norman Rockefeller syndrome, because we start seeing ourselves sitting at the table with an abundance of food.
Yes.
And that reality, when we come out and we transition from military life into civilian life, we have these big expectations. I'm sure, even if you haven't had them yourself, Doug, that you've heard of other veterans that have come out with that dream. I'm going to buy a house. I'm going to have this. I'm going to have that. You know, and then all of a sudden, the reality hits. No, I'm not. You know, the economy has changed. Everything has changed. So how do we address that? Because that's a big problem.
Yeah, I think that part of the process really needs to start on active duty. And I tell you why.
On active duty, yes.
Yeah, and I tell you why I say that. I say that because if you are going to say you're going to buy a house when you exit the military, you're already not in the position to do so, because now you've changed employment. So what is the criteria to purchase a home? You know what I mean? To use your VA loan and so forth. And so there's a level of awareness in terms of, okay, this is what I want to do. Fine. What goes into doing that? Does that make sense? And so the veteran and you know, and the veteran have to also take some initiative as well. But this is why initiative.
Oh, yes, the initiative.
You know, and for me, this is why I personally want to serve in the veteran community, in the women veteran community, because then, yes, I should have, but I had no idea. Because being a service member, it's all or nothing. In psychology, we call military, law enforcement, firefighting, those three big organizations, we call them greedy institutions, because it's all or nothing.
All or nothing. That's right.
You understand?
That's right.
It's all or nothing. And if you're not, if you're not giving your all, you will not make it.
There you go. And that's it. Keep on pushing.
And so when service member exits military service, they have to learn that you're no longer in an environment that requires your all. But as you were a part of that organization and giving your all, you neglected yourself. You've neglected your families. You've neglected a lot of things in that giving of yourself.
Wow. That's powerful. That's powerful.
And so in making that transition, you know, it's learning. We talked about basic asking questions. It is learning, okay, I have to learn to make decisions independently. How am I going to do that? Because then as a service member, doggone it, they tell you what color underwear you're wearing today.
They tell you when you're going to go to the bathroom.
You know what I mean?
Everything.
Basic decisions we don't even make ourselves. And so this individual has to absolutely develop the cognitive skills and the cognitive capacity.
Now let me add to that too, just to bring that back in underneath the human umbrella. Okay, is that we all have to deal with that. I mean, it's not just the veterans who have to deal with it, because if you've been in a disciplinary, a very, very disciplinary background in your home, okay, then it's the same thing. You don't have a chance to ask questions. You do exactly what is being told for you told to you, and that's it. And so we thank you so much for being part of what we're doing today. And we have just enough time where I wanted to really, really pick the brain, here we go, to pick the brain of Lori. Lori's here today, and we have a future of building the differently abled artists and musicians as a segment of our program. And the reason why that's so important is that there are people that need a lot of healing out there, and part of restoring hope, part of addressing the hopelessness and helplessness and homelessness is learning how to heal self. And part of healing self, we found, and its research backs us up, is in art and music. And so that's why what Lori is attempting to do today, and unfortunately our musicians did not show up today for their discussion because they had some emergency that happened. So, but I wanted to just take a moment to kind of like pick Lori's brain about what the future of differently artists, musicians means to you, and the healing and creative process that's going on in your mind. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm happy to be here. I am not a vet myself. My daughter's a Marine Corps vet, and I thank you, all of you who have served. I just love you.
And your brother, which we're going to do an whole interview.
Brother. I have been performing for audiences since I was 5, so 65 years, and music and performing and art has made a huge difference in my life. I have a hidden disability. I deal with mental health challenges and other things, and about music, about writing, about theater, my life quality of my life was very different. And I think it's easy to get caught up in I've got to pay my bills. I can't pay my rent. I can't take time to listen to music. I don't have time. Well, making time for that can make the other things fall together. So even if it's just putting on some music behind you as you're doing your work or your homework or whatever. And it isn't just music or art or theater either. You're creative in any field. Creativity is just thinking outside the box. So you can be a creative mathematician, you can be a creative bookkeeper, you can be a creative homemaker. And I'm just excited to try to bring a little bit of this into these damn meetings, that people be exposed to some of these musicians who are jobs and still having their lives, but they've come to realize how much this creativity means, how important it is.
Thank you. And I hope that as we move forward, that veterans, especially our women veterans, will begin to expand more in that area. And I think that we're going to find more women veterans, as we had a very, very special one. Lucy Wong came on and showed her arts and crafts once, and how that's helped her to overcome some things. I want to go back and have some closure here as we finish up. And thank you so much, Lori, for being here. We look forward to the next Differently Able Network meeting, and having a nice segment of time where you can expose us to create your creativity and some art and music. Thank you so much. But Dr. Jane, in closure, I know you have some points that you still want to make for us, and we're going to go ahead and extend our time. Since this is a meeting, and it's a video podcast, so I hope that it's okay for you to go over a little bit more on your time here.
Okay, so couple things that I want to make sure that I emphasize is that with, I think you have to understand when we talk about stages of development, right?
Yes.
In stages of development, a civilian person is definitely, how do I say it? They don't have the confines of the military at 18, 19, 20, 24 to be able to make that transition, to learn to think for themselves and so forth. right?
Many, you're right.
Yeah. So the points that I have is we have to find our tribe. So what organization, what support system can we create for ourselves? That's a big one. Try to engage in volunteer opportunities, because then as we volunteer, we get to meet different people, we get to do different things, and so forth. And the final big one that I wanted us to do, because we already talked about local resources, we can become a part of online community like yours, right? And so those were the big ones that I had to, and attend networking events. Because sometimes they're networking event in person, sometimes they're online, and so forth. And
but
so
that ability, that initiative, I think is, and you said it's incumbent on the veteran. It's incumbent on the veteran to make that effort, and
yes,
and also to do it quickly when they see. Don't wait until your mortgage is 3 months behind. Okay, when you see that the projection of the future is that it's going down, that's time to talk to somebody. And what you just said just now, and I like the word tribe, because that's what we've developed here at the Differently Abled Network is a tribe of love and support for each other, and that we want more people with stories about being underserved to come forward, so that we can broadcast them and let people know what actually is happening out there. So, and volunteer opportunities are definitely here. We ask that if you're a student intern or if you have community service hours, especially for women veterans, that is a priority for us. So we thank you so much, all of you, for being here. And I'm Dr. Danita Applewhite. My background is in vocational rehabilitation and independent living. I'm a retired psychology professor, and I use my knowledge base and my experience from both sides of the desk to hopefully help others, help other service providers, the non-traditional ones like myself who go the extra mile. That's right. Okay. All right. And nothing wrong with that. So keep up the good work. And thank you so much for listening to us today. And we're signing off. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Applewhite.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Nice
you.
meeting all of you.
Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rosalyn. Thank you very much. Thank you, Consuelo Estete. Thank you very much for being here today. From Peru. Okay. And Douglas Reynolds, our Air Force veteran. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. And Morgan Golak, thank you so much.